I've had the Buds Z2 for a little over 9 months now, and these aren't exactly the original set I bought because those started developing an ANC issue that got worse over a period of time. Thankfully, OnePlus did acknowledge this as being a manufacturing defect and did replace my earphones. At the time, I had to wait for about 2 weeks, but it was worth the wait because the replacement hasn't had that issue ever since. So on a build front, these have stood the test of time because I've not really had any issues with anything coming apart. It still looks almost as good as new now. One thing to keep in mind is I don't use these to move around much. I don't keep these in my pocket. I don't keep them in my bag. I'm usually using these in the studio and I cycle between a few. So there isn't too much wear and tear on these earphones or the case for that matter. But I would presume that if you do use these for your regular everyday use, especially if you have the black case, it's bound to pick up a whole bunch of scratches and scuffs. The overall comfort with the earphones, I'd say, is pretty good because I've never really had any discomfort with these in particular. The earphone housing is small and compact enough not to cause discomfort. I have had a discomfort issue with the Realme Buds Z3 and the Oppo Enco Air 2 Pro. As much as I like the Oppo, it does get a little uncomfortable for me, especially with my left ear. Now I've cycled through all the ear tips with those earphones, but there is no benefit with that because it's the housing of those earphones that are as large as they are. The Buds Z2 on the other hand is a very comfortable design and I can keep them on for hours on end. On a feature front, these are fairly straightforward as most other TWS earphones. You have all your touch and tap controls with these which work perfectly fine. I have never had any issues operating those functions. It's never really glitched out or freaked out whenever I've tried to do something like that. I do however wish that it had a slide function like the Nothing Ear one did because that slide up and down for volume control is quite convenient, but it's sad to see that Nothing themselves have done away with the slide functionality and just moved to the squeezing system. But this works as it should. In fact, if you are comfortable with the touching and tapping for any of your gestures, this will work just fine because it's very responsive. It's never really lagged or delayed whenever I've had to input any gestures in particular, and it's comfortable to use. Something on a feature front that is interesting is I have updated my HeyMelody app a few times. Whenever there is an update, I do update it, and when I've gone into it recently, I don't know how new this is, the EQ settings that this has expanded. In fact, it's got a series of EQs now. It's got balanced by default, bold, serenade, bass, and a custom setting. So I don't think these EQs were there when I did the original review. So I will touch a little bit on how these EQs sound in the chapter about sound. But if you do want to know in detail how these earphones do sound, I'll leave the link to my in-depth review in the description below because I go into a lot of detail when it gets into their sound, in particular in the in-depth reviews. Another thing I normally redirect my reviewers to for my in-depth reviews is to see the call demo, but since you're already here, I think it's easier if you just watch the call demo now. So I will do the call demo exactly where I always do them, just to see how it sounds after all this time. So I'm calling from the usual busy street where I normally make these calls from, just to give you a sense of how much noise these earphones are going to be battling with the environmental noise cancelling. There is a good amount of traffic going on behind me and some construction work as well. So I have been on the camera microphone all this time, and I'll switch over to the Buds Z2 microphone right about now. So I suspect this will be doing a pretty good job because it's never really had an issue in the past. I think there was only one set of earphones that was maybe marginally better than this. So this is pretty much how you can expect your sound, your voice to be carried over to your recipient. And this is of course the worst kind of situation you'll be in on a very busy street. But if you're in an office environment or in a quiet park, it's not going to be battling so much. So it's bound to be a little clearer in those kind of environments. So I hope this demo has given you a better understanding of what these earphones can do. And I will see you back in the studio. I have to say the active noise cancelling on this is actually pretty good. Now, the original set that I did have developed this hissing sound. This hasn't developed that after all this time and after all these months of use. But it does do a good job with the regular removing of fan motor noises or even getting rid of the engine motor sounds from the busy street right outside of my studio. I can't really complain about it because I think it's pretty good because I am also using an LG FP5, which is supposed to be way more premium. At least that had an MRP of about almost 20,000, but it's being sold for a much better price now. And if your sole purpose is active noise cancelling, if I were to compare the active noise cancelling of the Buds Z2 to the LG FP5, the Buds Z2 do a much better job. The LG FP5 is a very subtle kind of ANC compared to this. Now on a sound front, I've never really had an issue with the Buds Z2 except for the fact that it's been a little too bass heavy, and I myself have never liked too much bass because of the genres of music that I listen to, and it's a matter of preference. So it's not that it's not been detailed enough or there's not been enough clarity. Its imaging and staging is good enough. It is much like every other earphone that's available in this price segment. In fact, some people have asked me to compare the Oppo Enco Air 2 Pro to these. Now, this sounds much fuller. Now, a big reason for that is this has no amplification issue like the Realme Buds Z3 and the Oppo Enco Air 2 Pro always sound like they weren't being amped too well, like they didn't have a very good amp chip. These, on the other hand, I think these have to be the loudest earphones I've ever heard, because usually I don't go past 60% on a lot of earphones. With this, 45% to 50% is more than loud enough. It gets a little too loud. So if you're looking for volume and you want something that's really, it can get there for you, these are the set of earphones to go for. Although I wouldn't recommend listening to volume too loud because it can damage your hearing in the long run. So the interesting thing about the sound factor now are those new EQ settings. So I'll just look at them and tell you what I thought of them while listening to this recently. The balanced default mode is the method that I tested them on in the in-depth review. And the way they sound is, I think it's going to appeal to a lot of people because it is a little bass heavy. It is a little in your face. It's perfect for EDM. It's perfect for rock. It's perfect for heavy metal. It's got a kick that will really, well, it'll get your blood pumping. So it is an enjoyable set of earphones. It's just that I have a preference of a little less accentuation in the bass. That's the only issue here. Then you get bold. Now, bold in particular, I found almost to be exactly the way I like it because it sounds like a V-shaped signature. The highs are slightly elevated. The mids are pulled back slightly, but the bass is where it needs to be. It's not over enthusiastic and it's not lost entirely. So I have enjoyed the bold featured Soundmaster EQ in particular. Then you get Serenade, which is similar sounding to bold, but it sounds a bit shouty. So it sounds a bit like this. The mids just sound a bit enclosed, so it's not as enjoyable if you're listening to certain genres of music. And then of course you've got your bass boost mode, which I honestly think, I don't think you really need a bass boost mode with these because they are very heavy in the bass department, even in the default mode. But if you are a bass head, this is going to definitely keep you very happy. And of course you do have your custom settings, so you can always tweak with the custom mode as well. So overall on a sound front, this is a very enjoyable set of earphones. Even now, for that matter, the few earphones I've compared it to, I think this has been the most excitable when it comes to the volume factor. It's very sensitive to your volume increases. So the biggest strength of the Buds Z2, I'd say, on a sound front is definitely its bass, because if you are a bass enthusiast and you want to spend money like on the Realme Buds Z3 or the Oppo Enco Air 2 Pro, if you do spend the extra bucks for the Z2, I don't think you're going to regret spending that extra money because it's going to give you the bass you want anyway. Whereas if you spend a little less on those two earphones, you might feel like you're wanting for this in particular. One thing that I usually do mention is the battery life. Now, these have managed to maintain their battery levels fairly well. I can use these up to 2.5, 3 hours without any issues. I don't think they've really diminished too severely. If you feed it too much power, the battery life is going to deteriorate significantly, and these are all very small cells, from the case to even the batteries in the earphone. So if you can manage to give it a slow charge from a computer, or if you've got an old charging brick lying somewhere that isn't a fast charger, I'd strongly recommend using that, because this same method I followed ever since I started reviewing earphones almost 3 years ago. And I still have some earphones that are still working where the batteries aren't completely flat. They have reduced over time, but they're not completely dead. Some people have reached out to me who have dead batteries even after 8 or 9 months, and that usually the culprit is the fast charger, plugging them in and hoping that it charges up within half an hour, an hour. I would strongly recommend not doing that with any set of earphones that you have. So after 9 months of use, would I still recommend these earphones? Well, I've not really had much of an issue with these except for them being a little bass eccentric, but that bold EQ setting seems to level things out very nicely, so I can't really complain about that. And the other issue I have is the layout in the case. I don't like how the earbuds are placed. I prefer if they were sort of straight on, like the LG FP5 that I have is mounted very directly. It's very easy to take them out and put them back in. These are a little fiddly. I've never gotten used to its layout exactly. And of course, when it comes to its call clarity, you are the best judge because you are sitting in the reviewer seat during the call demo. If you've missed it, you can head on over back to the call demo and see exactly how this set of earphones would have sounded or carried your voice over to your recipient. And I'm sure if it was good enough for you, you would consider buying this. Now, how much do these cost after all this time? Well, I did think that they would have dropped the price a bit, but it seems that OnePlus has been selling this for a steady 4,999 bucks. Now, that is a bit expensive compared to the Realme Buds Z3 and the Oppo Enco Air 2 Pro, but you do have certain returns if you're spending that much more, primarily in the sound front. When it comes to bass in particular, if you are a bass enthusiast and you have a little more money to spend than what those earphones cost, it's worthwhile spending the 5,000 rupees on this because you're not going to regret it. And even that issue I mentioned with the active noise cancelling hissing that a lot of people are getting, I was getting a lot of people commenting on that specific video I made about OnePlus replacing those earphones. The frequency of comments on that has dropped significantly. So I think that stock that may have had that issue is most likely totally off the shelves. It's off the market now because I think that everyone that had that issue has traded those earphones in. So if you do want to buy these, you can, of course, and I will provide the link down below if you'd like to buy these. So I hope you found this video informative and that I've helped you make some sort of purchase decision. If you would like to support the channel, I'm sure you know exactly how to. But of course, thank you for tuning into Paul's POV for some sound advice.